"Oh, hello there, come have a seat," said the old doctor with the greying hair as I entered his office. "Hello, doctor," I answered with a half-smiling expression on my face as I sat at his table. The table was riddled with various papers and folders fitting for a doctor like Dr. Melamedov. He was my psychologist. Ever since my mother had passed in an unexplained manner, the cops claimed there was a gas leak that blew up her condo, but for some reason they did not let me see what was left of her. I am suffering from something similar to PTSD, I suppose. I hadn't been fully diagnosed yet with the disorder, but the doctor says I do seem to suffer from mental trauma. The doctor asked me to hand him my patient's card, and so I did. Afterwards he asked, "So, how was your week?" I looked into the aging doctor's eyes and rubbed my hand across my chin. Afterwards I had said, "Honestly? Terrible. The treatment is not working. I've been having nightmares every single night, and for some reason I'm constantly..." The doctor cut me off there and started typing something on his computer while he says, "Describe me your nightmare, please." I thought to myself, great. This again. This meeting is going to last longer than I wanted it to. I made myself comfortable on the chair and started retelling my nightmare to my therapist. Okay, I'll start by mentioning one nightmare in which I'm locked in a tiny room and water starts filling it until I drown. Once I was dead in the dream, I woke up. The doctor responded to my description. "I suppose you feel like you are being stifled by something. To me, that seems like a normal morning process. Do you have anything else you would like to mention?" I proceeded to say, "There was this one dream where I am in a dark lit forest and I am running around, terrified as if something is chasing me, as if my life is in danger. Nothing happens, however." "And?" the doctor asked. "Well, it ended when I hit my head on a tree whilst running, and I woke up with somewhat of a headache," I answered, embarrassed. The doctor had noticed the discomfort on my face and said, "You should not be ashamed. It's simply a dream, and for the most part, dreams aren't as logical or coherent as life. Are there any other dreams you'd like to tell me about?" I stared at the doctor, tried to think of something, but nothing came to mind. And so I said, "No, nothing, doctor." Suddenly, I remembered something, vividly. "I take that back, doctor. I do remember this one dream. I would like you to tell me what you think about it." The doctor began playing with a pen between his rather large fingers and said, "Very well, tell me." I took a deep breath, exhaled the air out of my lung, and began recalling the dream. Okay, so I found myself lying on the ground inside this greyish-yellow field, and I was really cold. There was what seemed like a bright sun in the sky, but it too was in shades of greyish-yellow. Everything had that greyish-yellow kind of colour to it. Everything. At first, this dream was pretty much normal. I had gotten up on my feet, and I felt great. It felt like I was on a vacation. For a while I was walking aimlessly in this dream, just strolling around this field I was in. Some time into my dream I saw there was this person standing in the trees at the edge of the field. It wore black clothing. It was hooded and was simply standing there, doing nothing. I called out to this person, but no response came. I started walking towards the person, but once I was close to the woods, it had vanished without a trace. I looked around and there was nobody. I called out. No response came. I started walking back toward the greyish-yellow field, and after a few steps, I felt like there was someone behind me, following me. I turned around, and I was alone. The sensation of having someone staring at my back did not go away. I started walking, hastening my pace every couple of steps, almost to the point of running eventually. The feeling of being stared at did not go away. It persisted, it got stronger, and I became worried. Laughter came out of nowhere. It was unbearable, sickening, frightening. Full-blown madman's laughter. It got stronger with each passing moment, to the point that I fell down to my knees as my eardrums started banging painfully. By that point I was feeling terrorized by whatever was going on, and once my chest began pounding due to the stress, I woke up. On top of the creepy dream, my room was freezing for some reason. The doctor looked at me awestruck. He did not expect something as odd as my dream. He placed both of his hands onto the floor and began speaking. "Okay, from what I see here, you think someone's following you, maybe threatening your safety. I do think you keep the idea of your mother being murdered instead of dying in a freak accident somewhere deep in your unconscious mind, along with all your instincts and primitive cognitive functions. Your dreams, our dreams, they are a gateway to a person's mind. They represent whatever occupies our mind during the day. In your case, the idea that some psychotic maniac has killed your mother as part of his murder spree. Highly unlikely if you ask me. So what should I do to stop thinking this way?" I asked. The doctor replied coldly, "Get over your surreal ideas that your mother was killed, and just accept the fact she died in an accident. It's fairly common." He continued, "You could go to the remains of her condo and see for yourself what had happened there, and after you do that I recommend an actual vacation. Seems like you might be wanting that too." "All right, I'll try it. Thanks, doctor, I guess that'll be it," I told the doctor, who had nodded. We shook hands and I went out of his office. I was headed home and I felt cold. It was September, but it was actually quite warm that autumn. My best shot at relaxing back then was to call a few friends and have a few beers with them. Therefore, I invited my best friend Jan, and the girl I'm head over heels for, but wouldn't dare to tell her so, Marina. Once they showed up, we sat down to eat a pizza I had ordered earlier, due to my lack of will to cook something decent that day. We could not go out properly because it was Tuesday, and we all had our jobs to go to the next day, so we settled on drinking a bottle of beer each. Once we were done eating, we sat down at my living room to watch some movies. I sat at the right edge of my couch. Next to me sat Marina, whose long red hair looked so good on her pale shoulders, and her large green eyes would mesmerize me whenever I looked into them. Jan sat next to Marina on the left edge of the couch. We started watching some movie and suddenly Jan said, "Hey man, why did you just giggle?" I looked at him with shocked eyes and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I slid my back down the couch a bit and Marina rested her head on my shoulder. A few moments later she said, "I think you have ghosts in here, you know." I straightened myself up and Jan and I looked at each other confused. What are you talking about?" I asked. Marina straightened up as well and said, "Okay, this might sound weird, and I am not making fun of you here or anything, but I am sure I had just seen a pale kind of transparent figure pass by the mirror." What the fuck? I thought to myself. Marina cut my line of thought. "It's way too cold in here. Could you please bring the heater?" I was snapped back into reality, and it was indeed colder in the room than it should have been. It felt like that night. I said I would get the heater that was in the building's storage basement, and I had warned the couple that they must behave while I'm gone. I got down to the basement. It was a large, dark space, so I turned on the lights. Much to my annoyance, I found out that my heater was resting beneath a pile of object my neighbors left in the basement. So, after a long few minutes, I was able to dig out my heater from the pile of items it was buried under. I raised the small heater in victory, and then I heard a scream. It came from above. The staircase. I dropped my heater on the floor. I probably broke it, but that did not concern me at that moment. I was worried something had happened to one of my friends, and so I ran up the stairs, Unable to find anything out of the ordinary, I ended up reaching my apartment. The door was closed. Once I opened that door, oh God, I wish I hadn't. Once I opened the door to my apartment, I was struck with the most heinous sight imaginable to man. I saw Jan lying in a pool of his own blood, his body broken down, lifeless, riddled with huge cuts all over, his organs lying around him. He had his guts on top of his torso. His liver was spilling out of his side. A chunk of his brain was on the floor, next to a horizontally cut piece of his skull. His limbs were separated from the rest of his body. Had it not been for Marina's loud screams, I would have fallen on the floor and puked myself to unconsciousness. Marina was just standing there, in the corner of my living room, crying and violently shaking as new cuts kept appearing out of nowhere around her fragile body. The sight made me regain my sense and shout, "What the fuck is going on here?" The cutting had stopped. The shaking had stopped. And Marina fell to the floor and kept on sobbing painfully in the corner of the room. I went to reach Marina, but once I met a step in her direction, I was frozen dead in my tracks. I could not move. I felt as if something had passed in front of me, something ice cold, some sort of a weak yet extremely prominent chilling breeze. Then the laughter returned. That sickening, sadistic laughter came back to haunt me, and I was frozen in my spot. I was paralyzed with fear and could not move for what seemed like an eternity. Eventually I mustered enough power to move my petrified muscles once more. The laughter never stopped. I turned around to see the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. I felt like my whole body was spasming due to the terror that surged through my body. I felt like I had indescribably painful muscle spasms all the way from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. Then and there, I realized how durable the human R is. My heartbeat was probably comparable to a machine gun's fire rate at the moment. I tried saying something, but all that came out were terrified, stuttering sounds. Why, yo, oh, aunt, Ray, real. In front of me stood a large figure dressed in black clothing from head to toe. Every single body part this thing had was covered in some black cloth-like thing. Only the face and its hands were visible. The skin of this creature had a sickly blue tone to it, almost like that of a corpse. It was swollen and stretched. Its lips were bloated and red. They were revealing rows of yellow, jagged teeth. Its eyes a brown, misted mess with dilated black holes in their center. Its sickly blue hands had feline-like claws at their fingertips, and they were colored in a dirty brown shade. Each of these hands held some object resembling a large knife without a handle. That thing smiled at me. A smile so wide it seemed like its jaw muscles were going to be ripped apart. It looked like his jaw was going to fall to his feet any moment now. It had said in a raspy, high voice, "Oh, I am real as it gets." That thing kept on saying, "You probably remember I tried telling you my name is that of one of your kind's myths, but you twisted into Poozikin. Well, I've liked this name, and I've been calling myself so ever since. Ha 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 ha. There's no chance that you are real. I made you up. You are just an imaginary friend. This is just my slow descent into madness. Yes, I am just imagining all this sitting here in the middle of my living room, probably rocking back and forth like the freak I've become," I said. That thing simply started laughing again. It laughed so loudly I fell backwards. Its mouth widened in an unnatural manner. It seemed like it was going to rip up and fall from the rest of his face. All the while this thing was laughing, I murmured to myself that I am just losing my mind and that I had to snap out of it. This nightmare, however, would not end like that. Slowly it stopped laughing and said, "Do you know why you are still sane? Because I did cut up your mother. I did it because I knew how she was treating you since your father had died. I knew everything. I knew about that last fight you had. I care about my friends. I care about you. I did what was needed to be done for your own good. I was next to you for a few years now." As he was saying that, I grabbed my head between my hands and began shouting, "Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up." It did not stop talking, however. It simply ignored my frantic screaming and kept on said, "Do you know why you managed to befriend me? Because you were never afraid of me. You are special. At some point you've grown up. Your curfew was no longer due at 8 p.m. And then came your peers and the females. And soon enough you forgot I had existed. This saddened me, but I was not offended. I've been around your kind for a long time. I knew this is how it is with you. Therefore I decided to get myself a new friend. But I could not. They were all scared. I came back to you, but you did not even notice me. Not that it was of any bother. I just enjoyed the fact that I could watch you, protect you, and simply be around you. Around that point, I was almost at the point of a mental breakdown, and I just screamed at the top of my lungs that none of it was real. I started to beg for it to stop, but this thing, and it just kept on talking. He said, "I've never planned on hurting your friends, but then they decided to hurt you." Once it had said that, everything stopped. It's like my maddening fear was gone for a moment. I let go of my head and looked this thing, this so-called imaginary friend, and said, "Bullshit." A large smile was formed once more on its face, stretching almost from ear to ear, and it said, "This male, he was copulating with her almost on a daily basis." One of his thin, blue, sickly sharp fingers was pointing at Marina. "She toyed with you instead of telling you the truth." My eyes widened due to the revelation that was laid in front of them. I looked at the girl who was still sitting in the corner, trembling and crying. I asked her, "Is this true? Is it true? Is it telling the truth?" I shouted at her. Marina just sat there and kept crying. She started murmuring something to herself, but then Poozikin's maniacal laughter was echoing in my ears once more. I felt a cold breeze pass through me, and then new cuts began appearing on Marina's already tortured shell. Her cries grew louder and louder once more. I screamed at the top of my lungs. "No!" It was already too late. The screaming and crying had subsided, and I fell down to my knees and began weeping myself. Poozikin said, "It's okay, friend. It's all over now." I was about to turn around and lash out at him, but before I could, I felt something frozen touch my shoulder. It was so cold it felt like I'm being stabbed with 1,000 tiny needles. The pain has brought me to the point of breakdown. I passed out from exhaustion, I guess. I woke up the next day at the local hospital. I was told by the doctors that I am going through an extreme fatigue. They claimed they've never seen someone so worn out. Other than being fatigued like no one else, I was informed I had a hand-shaped frostbite on my shoulder. When I asked about my friends, I was told there was no one with me when my neighbor found out I am lying, unconscious in the middle of my living room. Apparently he saw that my door was open and decided to check if everything is fine. And then he found me, just laying there. My friends were reported missing. No one had seen them ever since, it seems. Once I got out of the hospital, the laughter came back. Its voice came back. And breeze, that freezing breeze, I would feel it occasionally. Shortly afterward, I've decided the best thing to do to get people away from the danger I posed was to step out of civilization and ended up settling in a shack not far from Arctic Yakutia in central Siberia. I'm living here for 6 months already. Now it turns out I was not insane, and nor I posed any danger to human beings. I found that out once I realized dismembered corpses of animals would keep appearing next to my doorstep. I started using these animal corpses for food and fur. Sometimes there are dismembered human corpses as well. I make good use of these too. Anyhow, the only reasonable explanation as to why these corpses keep appearing here that I could come up with is that Poozikin is not an imaginary friend. Poozikin must be a true friend. The day it all started, I was sleeping in my bed with my wife. I was dreaming of beautiful women who turned into demonic creatures and killed the men they were having sex with. In the dream, I escaped by calling in one of the nerdiest kids from my high school, someone I hadn't seen in over 20 years. He came to the party where the beautiful women were assembled, saying, "All these wonderful girls really want to have sex with me?" I nodded and pointed him deeper into the party. As I ran away, I heard his screams of horror and pain follow me out. Sometimes my dreams are bizarre, but this wasn't too unusual. What was unusual was that I was suddenly awoken with a bright penlight shining directly in my eyes. I was awake instantly. "Wake up, motherfucker!" A high-pitched, insane voice started yelling in my face. The light was blinding me. I heard my wife gasping and hyperventilating on my side. I turned and saw her throat was already slashed. She was staring directly at me, arterial sprays of bright red blood soaking the pillow and white sheets of our bed. My eyes adjusted rapidly to the presence of light, and behind it I saw a tan-looking man with long, stringy black hair. His eyes looked pure black, and his teeth were covered in metal and sharpened to points. I felt a pistol pushed into the side of my temple, the metal crunching into bone so hard that I saw stars for a moment. "Where's your fucking jewelry? Where's your money? Give me all of your valuables now!" the insane voice of the man said. I put my hands up. "There's a safe under the bed," I said, feeling dissociated. Part of me wondered if I was still dreaming. The man pulled the pistol up and brought it down on my nose. I heard a crunching sound, felt the breaking of the cartilage within my skin, and a sense of fiery pain rushed through my face. It was like being hit by electricity, zipping directly into the center of my head. "Dade, then how about you hurry the fuck up and open it?" he said, laughing. My wife was choking on her own blood by this point, her breaths coming slower and slower as she died only a few inches away from me. She would stop breathing for 5 or 10 seconds, then take in another heaving, gurgling gasp. I thought each would be her last, but she struggled on for nearly half a minute before her suffering mercifully came to an end. I got out of bed slowly, blood streaming down my face. Pulling the comforter up, I punched in the code for the safe. The man stayed inches behind me. The smell of body odor, rancid breath, and old leather emanating off of him. I thought of my daughter in the next room. "Please take it," I said. "Just take it and leave." He laughed. At that moment, my daughter walked into the room. She was bleary-eyed, looking small and helpless in her little PJs. She carried her stuffed puppy with her in one arm. "Daddy," she said in a tiny voice, sounding scared and uncertain. "No, Lillian," I shrieked. "Get out of here." But it was too late. The psycho raised his gun and shot her. As if in slow motion, I saw a blossom of blood explode across her chest, and she fell, coughing up blood and rolling onto her side. She flailed her arms uselessly, trying to scream for help. I stood up, turning abruptly as the intruder pulled out a dagger from his belt. He shoved it into the side of my throat. An agony like I had never imagined took over my consciousness. I ran at him, spraying blood everywhere as I fought. But the blood loss and pain was too much. I was slow. I tried punching him in the face, tried breaking his nose or tearing out his eyes, but I knew the blood loss would soon end me. Without a second thought, I wrapped my hand around the dagger, pulled it out and stabbed the serial killer in the stomach. The blade slid in smooth and easy, but no blood came out. Instead, some black, vile fluid rushed out. It smelled like a rotten body, tones of rotting fruit and spoiled meat mixing with sickness and rancid blood. The man laughed, but after a few seconds, he looked affected. His eyes widened in surprise. He slumped over and kept giving off a weak chuckle as he landed on the floor. I fell next to him. The squirting, bright red blood from my neck wound, staining the walls. My vision started to go black as I died, and the pain faded away. Darkness consumed me. And that was the first time I met the man who would haunt my life. I died fighting, my throat nearly slit by the huge dagger he had shoved inside it. I awoke, covered in sweat and yelling at the top of my lungs. Next to me, my wife jumped up, her eyes wide, her skin pale. "Jesus Christ, Mike," she said. "What are you trying to do? Give me a heart attack." I looked around. The man was gone, but it was still the middle of the night. "Oh my God, what is that smell?" Tia asked. She looked at me, getting out of bed quickly. "And what happened to your neck?" "What do you mean? What happened to my neck?" I said. The spot where I had been stabbed still felt raw and sore. I rubbed a hand over it and felt the smooth skin of scar tissue. Looking down, I realized the black fluid that had spurted out of the home intruder still covered my body and had, by now, seeped into the bed as well. "What are you, sleepwalking?" she asked, a strong note of concern in her voice. I shook my head rapidly. "Tia, we have to get out of here," I said, getting out of bed quickly and going to the closet for a suitcase. "We have to go. Right fucking now. Something is coming. I mean, someone is coming. Go get Lillian up." She looked at me as if I had gone crazy. "It is the middle of the night," she said. "Lillian has school in the morning, and you have work." "I don't give a shit about work," I said, exploding. "Someone is coming here to kill us, all of us. Trust me. I know it sounds crazy, but I saw it happen. We have to go." Lillian walked into the room, bleary-eyed, looking small and helpless, carrying her stuffed puppy in one arm. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she said in a barely audible voice. "Are you sick? What's that goop all over you?" "I am fine, sweetie," I said, going over to her and stroking her smooth cheek. I was so happy to see her alive and healthy that tears started falling down my face. "But we have an emergency. Go pack your things. Enough for a couple of days. We're leaving here in 10 minutes. My wife sighed, getting out of bed. She grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started throwing clothes and toiletries into it. A sense of relief washed over me when I saw her packing. 10 minutes later, we were all dressed and in the car, our suitcases in back. I peeled out of the driveway. We drove in silence for a minute before my wife coughed gently and asked the question that I knew I couldn't answer in any sane way. "So what's going on right now?" she asked. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Lillian's eyes wide and scared in the back seat. I looked over at my wife. She had a look of concern and worry on her face as well. "Okay, this is going to sound crazy," I said, "but I saw all of us die. I experienced it. Some serial killer broke into our house and cut your throat. Then he shot Lillian, and finally he stabbed me, and I died trying to fight him off." The silence in the car was palpable and thick. "Honey, that was probably just a vivid nightmare," my wife said. I shook my head. This was no nightmare. This was real. You don't feel your nose getting broken and yourself getting stabbed to death in your dreams. You don't feel agony like I felt. And the agony of watching you two die was even worse, I tried to explain. We need to get as far away from here as possible, at least until I figure out what to do. I turned left at the end of my road to drive towards the forest roads at the edge of our town. They would take me to the next state over, and then I could figure out where I was going. The place looked deserted and eerie. My headlights shone on the trees and tobacco fields on both sides of us. There were barely any houses out here. I saw a glint of metal with shining spikes up ahead, my lights glinting off of the steel. Before I could slow down, all of my tires blew out. I tried steering, but I had been going too fast, trying to escape the nightmare that I thought had been behind me. The car fishtailed and then flipped. The crunching of metal and the shattering of glass combined into a cacophony. I smashed my head on the steering wheel, feeling my nose break for the second time in the past hour. And then there was silence. I was stunned, still held in place by my seatbelt, sitting upside down. Shards of safety glass glittered like broken stars all over the road and all around me. Out of the silence I heard it. Soft, even footsteps approaching from the field. I tried to spit blood out of my mouth, to unbuckle my seatbelt and get out of there, but I was stuck. "So you think you can run?" the high-pitched voice of the murderer said from outside my broken window. "You can't run anywhere that I won't find you." I smelled his rancid stench, but underlying it was another acrid smell. Gasoline. Whistling to himself, the insane man took the cap off of a gallon of gas, pouring it all around my car, sending a few splashes inside for good measure. I heard my wife and daughter waking up, their heaving sobs and stuttering questions, sending waves of remorse through my mind. If only I had done something differently, I thought to myself. "Edusa." "Goodbye, motherfucker," the man said, chuckling. He lit a Zippo, dropping it down on the puddle of gasoline. The pain of burning alive and suffocating was beyond anything that I could ever communicate. And, combined with my own screams, I heard the shrieking of tortured agony from my wife and daughter. That was, if possible, just as bad. This went on for what felt like weeks. I would awake in bed, and each time I died, a new scar or series of scars would show up from the encounter. Soon, my entire body was just a patchwork of old, healed scars, from my face down to my legs. I would always try to run, and the man would find me. He would kill me along with my family. We would be shot, stabbed, bludgeoned, drowned, or burned alive. He always found me, no matter what direction I went or how far away I made it. He was not human. I knew that much. He could somehow appear ahead of me, as if he either read my mind or was capable of teleporting. I thought I was in hell, but on the 27th death, something changed. I didn't wake up in my bed this time. I awoke, strapped down to a gurney, screaming and thrashing. A doctor from the hallway came into the room. "Mr. Dumas," he said to me, looking down. "Are you okay?" I looked at the leather straps holding my arms and legs in place. The doctor's eyes widened. "What is that black substance all over your body?" I saw that I was indeed soaked in the serial killer's blood. Yet again, I had grabbed a butcher knife when I left the kitchen. We had gone camping a 5-hour drive away in the northern mountains. And he had, of course, shown up. But I had gotten him good as well. I had stabbed him directly in the heart. "This," I said, indicating with my chin, "is the blood of the demon who has been haunting me." The doctor sighed. "And what are all those scars all over your body? You didn't have those when you came in, did you?" he asked, concerned. I shook my head. "I don't remember coming in this place," I said. These scars are from the same man. Check my whole body. They're all over. He won't leave me in peace." The doctor looked away. "Well, you've been in this place for 27 days, he responded. "What? What is this place? Where is my family?" He shook his head sadly. "Mr. Dumas, we have had this conversation already many times. I am sorry to say, but your family has passed away. You are in the Whiting Hospital for the criminally insane. You killed your wife and daughter nearly 4 weeks ago, and you have been here ever since the police brought you in," he said, his dark eyes boring into mine. I knew none of this could be real. "I would never hurt my family," I whispered. "What kind of sick joke is this? It was the man with the black eyes and metal teeth who did it." The doctor shook his head sadly, turning to leave the room. "You were in a psychotic fugue when you did it, and you have been ranting about this man ever since. The police and crime scene technicians did a full check of your home. There was no other man," he said. "Until you realize that, you will never be able to start the road to recovery." As he walked out of the room, he turned to look back at me one last time. "I'll send someone to clean you up." His eyes were pure black, and his teeth metal. He smiled broadly at me, showing the shining points, and then left. I didn't think he was a doctor anymore. "I'm writing you this letter from Whiting with some vague hope that the truth can be known. Whatever that thing was, man or demon, it will not leave me alone. I can only stay here, waiting for it to kill me again." I had been unemployed for months when I saw the job offer for a planner with no experience required. When I called, they told me to come down that night. The office was in the middle of 2 crumbling apartment complexes with gang graffiti all over the walls and ripped-open bags of trash strewn across the alleys. Other than a few homeless people and hooded figures standing on the corner, the entire area looked deserted. I entered the cracked stucco building and followed the signs for Avenzi planning. On the 2nd floor, I knocked on the door. It opened up with a loud squeal. On every wall stood posters for old horror and sci-fi movies, from Alien to Halloween to Predator, Phantasm and Hellraiser. A couple dull, incandescent bulbs barely illuminated the room. A large desk with an ancient woman behind it took up the majority of the room. She motioned at the seat across from her, and I sat. "Mr. Bellingham, Jason Bellingham?" she asked me in a soft tone. I nodded. "I am Dorothea Lamb. This will be a quick session. You will be paid per task. First, we need you to fill out some surveys." I nodded genially at this, and she gave me a clipboard filled with papers, directing me back out into the lobby to fill it out. I was expecting the generic name, number, address type forms, and that was how it started out. But it quickly became weird. "Do you believe in God?" one question asked. A checklist ran next to it, yes or no. "Do you think hell is real? Would you ever commit suicide? Do you think demons can possess your soul? Do you wish you were never born?" I stared blankly at the sheet for a minute, wondering if there were candid cameras filming me as part of some joke. I filled it out honestly and returned the sheet to the woman. She scanned it briefly, then put it in the top drawer of her desk, pulling a key from her pocket and locking the drawer behind it. "You're hired," she said, smiling widely at me. Her beady brown eyes studied me over her huge Cheshire cat grin. "Can you start training immediately?" I nodded, feeling a small, tight pit of anxiety in my stomach as her smile never faltered. Her eyes looked like tiny black holes in the overly bright fluorescent lighting of the room. Something felt wrong, but I really needed the money. I hadn't had a job in months, and my savings account was already overdrafted. If I didn't pay my rent by the end of next week, the landlord said she would begin eviction proceedings immediately. Absolutely, I said, offering her a wan smile. She smacked her meaty hands down on the desk, making me jump. Great, she said, still showing far too many teeth in her disconcerting grin. Follow me to the training center. She got up quickly, moving much faster than an obese woman like her would appear to be able, and motioned for me to come. I followed her down a hallway from her office, the carpet feeling wet and squelchy beneath my sneakers. The fluorescent lights flickered in overly bright strobes, making me feel nauseated and disoriented. Mrs. Lamb seemed totally unaffected by any of it. She walked with a grace unusual for someone who looked like she broke the 300-pound mark. She turned suddenly, opening a random door on the right that looked just like the endless lines of doors on both sides of the hall. It had no marking or number on it to differentiate it, but when she opened it, I saw it lead into a garage. Men and women in identical uniforms stood in lines next to vans labeled Celestial Pathway. They all had on pure white pants and button-down shirts for the men, or skirts and blouses for the women. Not a single spot or stain marred the cloth on any of them. They all stared at me like mannequins, with identical blank smiling expressions on all of their faces. Goosebumps popped out all over my skin, and a thin sheen of sweat began to gather on my forehead as my gut told me to get the hell out of there. But I really needed the money, so I ignored it and continued forward. From the corner of the room, a man stepped forward in an extremely expensive black suit from Dolce & Gabbana. It was professionally tailored and had a silky sheen that glimmered under the bright lights overhead. His pale grey eyes stared at me, as cold as iron. His white hair perfectly coiffed, his skin smooth and totally free of wrinkles, despite his advanced age. He handed me a business card. I looked down at its embossed words, frowning. Caravar Avenzi. Businessman, entrepreneur, enlightened being. Below that, it had his phone number, fax number, and email address. Hi there, I said awkwardly, holding out my hand. My name is Jason Bellingham. He shook it, his hand radiating warmth, his grip feeling like steel as he crushed my hand under his. Caravar Avenzi, he said simply, giving my hand a single pump before releasing it. You can call me Caravar, however. I am the owner and operator of this building, as well as many other businesses in the area. Most importantly, however, I operate a spiritual group here, one we call the Celestial Pathway. He motioned at the vans for emphasis, showing off the professionally wrapped massive letters that covered all sides of the vehicles. First of all, he said, pulling a clipboard from out of nowhere and handing it over to me, we just need to finish the formalities. This here is your NDA, which states you will never speak of what you see while working here to anyone. And this is your employment contract, $27 an hour to start, and potentially more later if everything works out for the best. My mouth dropped at this. Most of the temp and non-degree jobs around here paid anywhere from $13 to $20 an hour. $27 an hour was a life-changing amount for me right now. All the red flags I had noticed in this place were brushed away by my mind as a flood of hope took over. Thank you so much, I said quickly, excited, feeling my heart fluttering in my chest. You have no idea how much this job means to me. Caravar smiled politely at me, waiting for me to finish. Then he produced a blindfold from the inner pocket of his jacket. Put this on, he said bluntly. We must go to the worksite now, or at least you must go to the worksite. I have important things to attend to first. I held the blindfold in my right hand, like a dead fish limply strewn over my fingers. Put it on, he repeated insistently, his voice turning cold. I did as he commanded, a rising trepidation battling the need for money in my mind. A strong hand tightened around my arm, and I felt the stinging pain of a needle going into my neck. Then I lost consciousness. I woke up an indeterminate time later, feeling pine needles and twigs underneath my fingers, the smell of evergreens giving a pungent aroma to the air. Mixed in with that sweet pine smell was an undertone of rotting meat, urine and liquefied shit. I sat up quickly, thinking that I was blind for a moment before remembering the blindfold and ripping it off. What I saw in front of me horrified me. A few 100 feet away across a grassy field, a pile of nude bodies was stacked in a pyramid, legs and arms hanging out like loose stitches in an unfinished needlework project. The white-clad members of the organization stood next to a couple of the Celestial Pathway vans on the dirt road between me and the pile of corpses. The largest member stepped forward, and I recognized her instantly as Dorothea Lamb. "Good evening, Mr. Bellingham," she said sweetly, her beady eyes narrowing as she gazed down at me. "I'm glad to see you return to the land of the living. The time of your training has come." The rest of the organization members, which I was now beginning to suspect were actually cult members, stared at me silently, slight identical grins marring their otherwise expressionless faces. A black man with a shaved head stepped forward from the cult members, motioning for me to follow him as he turned and began walking towards the pile of corpses. Having no other choice, my eyes downcast as I walked past the expressionless faces, I followed him. Next to the rotting bodies, I saw two things that sent a sense of shock through me. An industrial-sized wood chipper and a black hole in the ground, about 5 feet across and perfectly level with the grass and dirt around it. As we walked closer, though, I realized that the hole was not a hole in the traditional sense. It shimmered and sent up sparks of iridescent light. The surface of it resembled an oil stain, the blackness mixing with the dying light of the day to form rainbows that shifted and morphed into one another. Behind that blackness, I saw what looked like humanoid shapes swimming and dancing, but as I tried to focus on them, my head began to pound, and they seemed to disappear or swim away. "I don't recommend you stare too deeply into that portal," the black man said with a growl. "Sometimes it can hypnotize people, and those it hypnotizes have been known to jump in from time to time. We never see them again." Tearing my gaze away, I looked up at him. "What's your name, friend?" I asked, trying to be as nice as possible, hoping I would still get out of here alive. "You call me Kay," he said, extending his hand. "In our religion, the monks and nuns give up our names. Only the workers like Mrs. Lamb or the leaders like Caravar Avenzi keep theirs." I shook his hand as he talked, making eye contact. He didn't smile. His shaved head reflected the light of the sunset as the sun began to disappear behind the trees. "Now listen up, because I'm only going to say this once. Your job is to dispose of the traitors," he pointed to the pile of bodies behind us, "and to feed the Asuras." With this, he pointed to the shimmering black hole. "The Asuras don't like full bodies, so we provide them with assistance." He pointed to the wood chipper. "Any questions?" I had many questions, but I wasn't going to say that. "What are the Asuras?" I asked. I thought he would slap me, but instead he simply stared daggers at me before responding. "They are from the stars," he said. "They came down from heaven, and they will return to it, bringing us with them. But until that time comes, we need to feed them and keep the organization pure. The Celestial Pathway is literally that, the pathway to the stars, the way to heaven for all of us, you included. If you choose to accept what is given, now get to work." I hate to admit it, but I did get to work. Kay turned on the wood chipper with a roar, and I grabbed the first body and dragged it over. He didn't want to touch it or help me in any way. I had the feeling none of the cult members liked to touch the bodies, which is very likely why they hired me in the first place. The body was still fresh, the blue eyes staring blankly up at me, as if asking why. Grunting, I pushed the feet up into the conveyor belt of the wood chipper, then grabbed the shoulders and lifted it. The belt did the rest of the work, carrying the body into the interior machinery. With a wet, crushing sound, the body began to disassemble. Pieces of bone and flesh began to roar out into the black, shimmering hole. I heard a harmonic song of joy from the hole as the slurry disappeared into it, and the opening seemed to expand outwards as the beings inside fed on the human meat. Kay indicated for me to continue, so I did. Some of the bodies were in worse shape than the first, the skin sloughing off in my hands, the bloated flesh releasing rancid-smelling gases that made me gag and cough. There were men and women of all races and ages, and even a few children. Under the baleful gaze of Kay, with all the other cult members ready to come at a moment's notice, I knew I had no choice but to continue my task until it was completed. I only hoped they would let me go home. Once I got to my 7th body, things started to go wrong. I picked up the fresh-looking body of a young Asian woman, but her eyes flew open. She was covered in blood and gore, but apparently not dead. Her breath began to come in heaving gasps as she looked straight at me, whispering, "Please, help me." Instinctively, I dropped her like I had accidentally picked up a poisonous snake. I almost started to scream, but at that moment Kay roughly pushed past me, pulling a syringe from his pocket and shoving it into her neck. Then he indicated that I should continue. "I can't continue," I wailed plaintively. "She's still alive. What if other ones are still alive too?" "They are dead to us, so therefore they are dead to the world. We are the path of life. We are the celestial path. Now move these bodies made of meat, you maggot." My head downcast, I did as he said. Grabbing her by the ankles, I began to pull the naked body towards the wood chipper. I didn't notice any breathing anymore from the woman, and I hoped for her sake she was dead. Out of pity, though, I put her into the conveyor belt head first, wondering if any of the others were actually alive when I put the bodies in. I shuddered at the very thought, my stomach turning in quick, nauseous flips. But I knew that if I refused, they would kill me. I could see it in the eyes of Kay and all the other cult members. Actually, speaking of the other cult members, what were they all doing here, I wondered to myself. Sneaking a peek in that direction, the dying light of the day illuminated a horrifying scene. They were gathered in a circle around a shimmering black being 30 feet tall. Its skin sent off rainbows as if made of oil spots on the pavement, and it had no features, no eyes, no mouth, no hair, nothing besides the human shape of a black behemoth. I saw the cult members praying on their knees to it, and as they murmured, the being seemed to grow and solidify. The air around it cracked with electricity, throwing off sparks of light in all directions. The longer I stared at it, the more I felt hypnotized until Kay came from behind me and smacked me in the back of the head. "Don't stare at the Asuras," he said to me. "You think you are worthy to even look upon it? You aren't worthy to lick the dirt from its feet." I nodded silently, then went back to work, dragging more bodies to the wood chipper. The hole continued to grow until I wondered if it would suck in the wood chipper itself eventually. The circumference of it was only a few feet away by this point, and the hole had grown to over 30 feet across. Looking down into it, I saw the oily black beings beneath the surface were writhing and dancing at an amazingly fast speed, almost too fast for my eye to see anything more than a constant blur. Kay came up beside me, looking down into the hole for a second. I pretended to walk back to the pile of bodies, but I kept a close eye on him. He continued to stare down, hypnotized, and I knew this might be my only chance to lose him and escape. I got a running start from 10 feet behind him, trying to sprint as quietly as I could. Despite this, he heard my footsteps and began to turn as I plowed into him at full speed. The half-turn ended up being to my advantage, as his legs tangled as he went flying into the black opening. His mouth opened in a silent scream as hundreds of black arms, all covered in that oily sheen of rainbows and colors, flew up and grabbed him. Pulling him in different directions, his body tore into pieces, then sunk beneath the surface. I took the chance and began to run towards the forest, away from the cult members praying to the black god behind me. As I passed the pile of corpses, I saw some of them stirring, trying to fight their way out from the tangle of arms and legs, rising up from the rotting bodies that surrounded them. Once I was in the woods, I just ran randomly, changing directions multiple times. I was caught in pricker bushes and my skin torn, but due to the adrenaline, I barely felt it. Eventually, I heard the roaring of traffic and followed it to a highway where I flagged down a car who called the police. I told them the entire sordid tale, and they gave me the benefit of the doubt, even allowing me to show them to the original building where I had interviewed. But now it was abandoned. All the posters and desks gone, all the vans missing from the garage. Not a person was in sight. They said they'd follow up with me if they found anything, but that was weeks ago, and I never heard anything back from them. But I did hear from my old friend, Caravar Avenzi, businessman, entrepreneur, enlightened being. At least, he sent me a piece of mail. It was a check for the hours I had worked. True to his word, he had paid me $27 an hour for the entire time I had disposed of those bodies for them, even including payment for the time taken to interview and travel to the site. And yes, I did deposit the check. After all, I really needed the money.